はい、それでは、ここからは。
So from this point onward, I want to hand over to Mika Obayashi of the Institute. I hand over to you, Obayashi-san.
田中さん、どうもありがとうございます。
Thank you, Tanaka-san. So today, for the system design on the offshore, the wind, not just from the price elements, but from the feasibility, viability, as well as investments point of view. So today, we would also like to include the perspective of suppliers. But as Ms. Tanaka has already announced at the outset, today there was no participant available. So for policy design and the investment decision, as well as feasibility and viability to do with Japan. Of course, supply system and the installments are also very important and need to be discussed. So inclusive of those points, can I ask the panelists to also give us your comments? At our institute, with the developers at the center, we have a closed door round table, and not just the price and visible aspects, but the viability has been mentioned repeatedly. There has been long-term uncertainty until the COD and the Japanese unique aspects, as well as predictability for the ports-related fees, and what will be the return on investment and return on cost, so to speak. So we should not try to be too formalistic, but discuss widely on what are the necessary conditions to bring success to the Japanese offshore wind market. Rebecca has mentioned that. Do you remember what you were doing back in 2023? In 2021, we always ask the question, what were you doing? This is the big question to do with the offshore wind. As you may know, last year, 3 projects have withdrawn from round 1. Not just offshore wind industry, but it had a big societal impact. So we need to rebuild the situation. And we need to once again solicit the bidders. So just in case of United Kingdom and Denmark, dialogue is now being pursued by the government in Japan. For our roundtable, the Japanese government has been sending their representatives. So we would like to, as much as possible, eliminate the uncertainties over the projects, and that is what is being required. So today, we have a representative from RWE, which had successfully bid under AR7, and what could be suggested for the system design for public tender in Japan. And the advice has been given from the Deloitte. And there's a representative from Deloitte Tomatsu as well. And we also have the previous speakers from GWEC, Ms. Rebecca Williams, and also Mr. William Lim from Danish Energy Agency will also participate. So can I turn to Jens? Jens, can you start?
こんにちは。私は Jens です。
Hello, I am Jens. Japanese a little bit difficult. The English is easier for me.
Thank you very much for the opportunity for the Renewable Energy Institute. And we also, as mentioned, we had a really good discussion also in a closed-door session yesterday. So those of you who participated, for some of it parts of the discussion might be slightly repetition. I'm a little bit uncomfortable to sit here without the representative of Vestas, because as a developer, when you don't have your OEM, you usually have a problem when you deliver projects, but I hope Raphael will be with us shortly. Let me give you a little brief overview of who we are. For those of you that don't know RWE, we are a global leading developer. We're an energy utility. We have been for more than 125 years, so much like the Japanese EPCOs. We are invested in all kinds of energy except for nuclear power, which we were active in up until the end of 2022, where the German government asked us to discontinue our nuclear power plants in Germany. For offshore specifically, we've been in the business, and I need to update this slide, for more than 25 years now. We have more than 3 gigawatts of net installed capacity. And we have been, maybe in the context of Japan, active here since 2018. We've submitted bids in round 1 and round 2. And I think everybody that was not Mitsubishi left that auction round with a bit of a peculiar feeling, and I think now also Mitsubishi has done the same. So I wanted to talk a little bit about something that's quite actual for us, and that's the current market environment that we find ourselves in with the, and honestly, I don't know what to call it, but the actions taken by the American and Israeli governments in Iran. And why do I do that? Because there's a lot of discussion at the moment within METI and ANRE, within the pricing committee, around what's the appropriate pricing for offshore wind in Japan. And we once again see energy dominating headlines all over the world. Oil and gas prices, as mentioned here, are very, very, very volatile. We see that shipping routes are facing, once again, geopolitical pressure, this time in the Strait of Hormuz. And this uncertainty is a reminder of a very, very uncomfortable reality, is that the next energy crisis, it's not an if, it's a when, and it's a matter of how prepared we are. I had the opportunity to join a similar event this time last year, where the chairman of JERA was also present, and he told to the audience that the gas depository in Tokyo Bay is around 10 days for LNG. So that leaves the country of Japan quite exposed, not only in terms of LNG, but also in terms of crude oil. The dependency on imported fossil fuel in Japan has, for the past 4 or 5 decades, sat squarely around 86%. And the only way to do something about not only decarbonizing our economies, making sure that the Japanese export business can continue to thrive, and that we put a stop in, or at least a dent, trying to stop climate change that also comes with a significant cost in itself, the only way to do that is relentless scale of renewables, and slowing the build-out will not reduce cost. And Japan is many things, but it's also very mountainous. It's quite difficult to roll out large-scale PV solar. It's fairly difficult also for grid restraints to roll out large-scale onshore. And therefore, the value proposition for offshore remains very, very strong. And while I share the notion of the Takaishi administration that we need to look at reopening nuclear power plants and potentially even building new ones, that also has, let's say, CapEx involved that by far increase offshore, and it also has much, much longer installation cycles than offshore, even though offshore is long enough as it takes. So our recommendation is that, yes, we need to look at new technologies, SMRs, if they ever come live. I think personally that's going to be some time, 10, 15 years. Fusion is something that's often talked about, but it's not a developed technology that is anyway close to being commercialized. And therefore, our strong recommendation is to focus on those technologies that are available at hand today. And I wanted to share that in this backdrop, because we need to electrify absolutely everything that makes sense. And the more we power with mostly homegrown electrons, the less dependent we become on fossil fuels. And the more we strengthen our overall resilience, and the more we also remain our ability for Japan to be an exporting superstar, also when it comes to new technologies, data centers, AI, etc. I know Rebecca talked earlier also about the AR7. Those of you who are familiar with RWE will know that we were quite successful in the latest auction round, clearing 6.9 gigawatts out of the 8.3 gigawatts awarded. And it's been boosted as a great success, and it really was. But it was also something that, for us, came at the behest of significant risk. Those projects have, since we took them over from Vattenfall, effectively been in development for more than 15 years. And the DevEx and CapEx spent on them were in the billions and not the millions. So significant pressure on us to deliver. We now need to deliver the Vanguard projects, the Dogger Bank South projects, and the Auli Moore project. There were a number of discussions also yesterday pertaining to one-stage auction, two-stage auction here in Japan. I think ultimately both can work, but it has a number of prerequisites. And I've tried to list them here. I won't go into detail. There'll be also a QR code. So those of you who would like to see the slides can just download them directly from the QR code in the end. But I think it's important to be mindful of these preconditions, that you need a long-term roadmap with critical targets. At the moment, we're in a little bit of a limbo stage. Yes, we know the government wants to re-auction round 1. We do know that there are plans for round 4. We also know that the interconnector between Hokkaido and Honshu is delayed. And the ticket sizes we see for the projects, we see that there would be a lot of benefit from looking at this more holistically, not taking it in a prefecture by prefecture, local community by local community acceptance point of view. Because if we could merge some of these projects to larger ticket sizes, we would see that they would also be more competitive with global environments. In top of that, you need a simplified and transparent permitting rules and grid connection. We don't have that yet in Japan. We are at the moment trying to progress our MTAO project, our Murakami Tainai project that we won in 2023. And we are knee-deep in very intense discussions with NK class certification, with permitting. We just recently submitted our EIA application. It's a very, very complicated process, and it's quite painful, to be honest. So there's a lot of work there. You need sufficient number of sites to foster competition. That's another thing we don't have at the moment. You need ports, vessel, and supply chain all scaled for wind growth. That's something we definitely do not have. We would really benefit here in Japan from a nationalized strategy when it comes to ports. You need bankable support reflecting realistic cost levels. I think with the ongoing discussions, I would want to commend METI to say that there is good talks about that at the moment. At the same time, you need a liquid wholesale market that industrial off-takers has alternatives to routes to markets. Based on our conversations, and we don't see that at the moment. And we also see a lot of the mega, some of the hyperscalers and some of the GAFAs actually taking a step backwards in terms of their previous commitments in relation to wanting all of their offtake to come from green electrons. I think at the moment it's more a matter of getting energy where you can. All of these prerequisites are very, very important. And I think I've listed some of the things that we don't have here in Japan. As I said, I'll share the slides later. But I do want to spend just a little bit on this because there are a couple of aspects that I think are very, very important. One is the first one, that a two-stage auction naturally leads to longer lead times and higher risk. Just a couple of years ago, we had a capital market that really favored long and big pipelines. Many developers, including ourselves, were participating in virtually any auction we could get our hands on. I think in 23, our company alone participated in more than 20 auctions. This year, if we're lucky, we'll be participating in 3 globally. So it's just to say there's less food in the trough for development, and I would be very keen, Reike, to hear your perspectives on your CAPEX exercise. Have you also included DevEx and OPEX? Because we see DevEx requirements in Japan that exceed any other market in the world. And for us to get to a stage where we could submit a bid both in round 1 and round 2, we were talking double-digit million euros. And I don't see many companies inclined to do that in the current market environment, to be honest. Now, that's one aspect. Some of my peers came up to me yesterday and said, Jens, but we lose competitiveness. That's what we're good at, doing all the site investigations and everything ourselves. And that's true. But if you, like I, care about making a positive difference and leaving a tangible positive footprint behind, then we have to think about what's best for the Japanese people, what's best for the decarbonization. And longer lead times only leads to a delay in what we need to be doing. I think the biggest hurdle that we have in the moment is that the site conditions differ significantly. Reike talked about 30 kilometers onshore grid connections. I see a lot of projects that double that or even triple that when it comes to offshore or onshore grid connections. That often has to cross very complicated crossings, rivers, freeways, multiple landowners. It's a very, very convoluted process, and one that we are frankly not the nearest and closest professional to undertake. I think that I'd be keen to hear your points, William, about where the Danish TSO typically and historically have had that scope. I know that that's also something that you've considered for your auctions now. But it is at the moment absolutely impossible to differentiate the sites. We have some sites that have hard rock. We have other sites that have a high presence of shallow gas. We have some sites that have onshore wind farms that need to be compensated very close to shore. And all of it makes it absolutely impossible for developers on an even basis to participate in the second auction round. And what we worry is that maybe you clear the hurdle in the first auction round, but that doesn't deliver the project. So that's why our strong recommendation is make sure that projects are delivered here in Japan. Let's make sure that we, government and industry, come together to ensure that the policy planning, the auction design, and the developer incentives are all made in such a way so that we can start to see projects coming into the ocean and off the ground, delivering green electrons to the benefit of the Japanese people. And that's, in our view, is best done in a step-by-step approach. I was very positive to hear from Fukuoka-san from METI yesterday that it's part of the Takaishi administration's overall growth plan to have energy security as part of their backbone for their way forward. And I couldn't support that more. And I think it's a matter of all of us in the room who likely see it the same, that we need to really empower METI to do everything that we can to make these projects build. We have a golden opportunity to do that, and I'd be very keen to see us at least in the mid to high section of what Regis graph was showing us. But that will require that we deliver the round 2 and round 3 projects, because without we will be low and perhaps even worse off. I did promise you that you would have a QR code. I think actually it's not for this presentation. It is in my other presentation for Monday, but if you reach out to me on LinkedIn, I'll make sure that we personally respond to each and every one of you. Otherwise, my email is here, so please do take a photo of that and we'll make sure to share the presentation. I know I spoke a little bit longer than I was supposed to, so I'll pause here and say thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jens, for your very enthusiastic comments. Yeah.
Perhaps you know the practice with this institute. Basically, the presentation will be uploaded on the website if we can get the consent from the speaker. So if we can get consent from the speakers, we would like to upload the materials on our website. I have some questions to Jens. About half of the audience members, first stage and second stage, you know this tender regime. However, the remaining half people may not know what's the two-stage bidding. Now, in Japan, we have a one-stage auction system. So the only one-stage bidding determines who is the winner. However, in the case of the UK, first sea areas will be determined in the first stage of the bidding, and the overall budget framework is determined, and then the sea area, the other people who won other sea areas, and within that budget, whether or not they will deliver projects, and other people will participate in the project bidding place. The
UK government is doing.
I think so. I think the translation was lagging a little bit there, and it was a bit complicated. So I'm not sure.
Maybe you can just briefly explain about.
I think it was on the right lines. Yeah. So in the one-stage model, you bid just one time, and within that you get your seabed, so where you're going to build your project, your site. And you also then have the offtake, if there is a government-backed offtake scheme as part of that as well. In the UK, it's different. You have two stages. So first of all, you enter an auction with the Crown Estate, which is a quasi-governmental / body connected to the UK Crown, so to the King, which awards seabed licenses, and then you have to wait for a period before then the offtake is auctioned separately. So there's two different auctions you have to participate in. And as Jens was saying, the time between those auctions can be very long. So in the example that was given of the Vanguard project, for instance, that project has been around for a very long time, waiting to enter the CFD. So that can really stretch out your development times.
And not to forget, I think we've also seen Denmark is not the only country that suffered from auction loss or lack of interest. I think we also saw that in the UK, right? And if AR7 tells us anything for a two-stage auction is you need all the prerequisites that I just listed out. But what was really decisive for us, and maybe William, I can answer the question you couldn't answer in relation to what's appealing to the Danish auction, because that's very much the same factors as what led us to bid and ultimately win in the UK. I'll give you a couple of examples. One, there was a CFD that was a two-sided CFD. So, and it made sense from terms of LCOE levels, right? So we saw that we could bid at a price level, we could clear at price level from under which we could actually deliver the projects at reasonable profit returns, which by and large is compared to many other industries, I would just add. I think the other thing that was particularly of interest for this particular auction round was that we went from a 15-year, let's say, PPA with the government to a 20-year PPA with the government. And then the last item that was also extremely important was the fact that this was indexed, right? So you share the risk in relation to if there's volatile changes in inflation or in market conditions in general. Because as we've seen in recent years is that cost of capital have gone up immensely and inflation has become an issue. And if we then translate that back here into Japan, on top of that, we have a yen that have depreciated with roughly 30% in the 4 years that I've had the pleasure of living in this country. So all of that you need to factor in. And I think those are some of the elements that whether you have a one-stage auction or a two-stage auction, that any government that wants offshore wind attention from developers should really seriously consider.
ありがとうございます。ただ一方でですね。
Thank you very much. But on the other hand, RWE said that two-stage system in Japan is too early to be adopted. I understand. But many Japanese developers are supporting two-stage auction system, actually, because today's Japan system, one stage, only one bidding, you have to make many decisions. And until COD or FID, there is a long-term. There is uncertainty in the case of Mitsubishi Consortium. Maybe I should mention the company name, but in the round one situation, I think you can understand this. So 4 years was very long to make the world whole changed. So even 2 years, the situation could be completely different in the world. RWE, supplier change, and also you have been exposed to various changes. But if we have a very rigid one-stage system and the decision is made, then it is difficult to change anything afterwards, post-bidding. In the case of Japan, we have a centralized system, and in that sense, seabed sea conditions may be unknown at the time of bidding. So.
And how can I put this fairly alone with my statement? But we believe that a one-stage auction is ultimately to the benefit of the Japanese people, and that's what we care about, right? And I think all of the obstacles that you would alleviate from a two-stage auction can also be alleviated under a one-stage auction. Now, it's a little bit, let's say you buy a piece of land to build a house on, but there's a permit issue that's waiting, right? You don't have your land clearance from the local municipality. You just start to build a house. If it's your own private money without that permit, likely you wouldn't do that. That's too much of a risk that the government's going to come back to you and say, you started building here, you can't do that, right? And development is a little bit the same. Do you start pouring millions and trillions of yen into a project development, doing very detailed site investigations, getting all your ducks in a row, making commitments towards supply chain, early stage ordering of steel, etc., without knowing what your ultimate revenue stream is going to look like? I don't think that there's anyone who's willing to do that. And what we look at and why we favor the one-stage auction is because we look at what METI is already doing. And I think this is what we should be focusing on. So METI have said for the future auction rounds, we want to move away from this developer-led system where anybody who wants to participate in a bid has to spend a lot of money up front. And that's where I agree with everybody who's also lobbying for a two-stage auction. we should alleviate that. We should try to lower the DEVIX cost. But with the government having taken up leadership and say, we will actually conduct all the initial site investigations that needs to be carried out, I think that's a major step in the right direction, because what we want to avoid is that the same amount of work is done by multiple different parties to get to just one result, right? So I think that makes no sense, that you have 5, 6, 7, 8 developers that are all going out doing detailed site surveying, and then only one wins in the end. That's true. You alleviate that risk to a certain extent with a 2-stage auction. But I think you can get out of that if the government has that scope. That's exactly what we're seeing in Japan. And it's also what we're seeing at the moment in Korea. Korea is going a step further. They then also say, we look towards other markets like Denmark, at least used to do it, and where we say the scope of the works has to be done by those who are closest to do it. So here they've said all the onshore grid connection works, because they have a similar challenge with a high degree of mountains, very, very long distances to the grid connection points. They've said, we want our local TSO to take that scope. That's some of the things that you can do under a 1-stage auction to give that clarity. But for me as a developer, to go to my board in Germany and say, oh, can you please give me authorization to submit a bid without having any idea of what the offtake is going to be like, I think there are other markets that I would then rather spend my development money in, to be very frank.
非常に賛成です。もし
I completely agree with you. If that is ensured and secured, in the case of Japan, that is not often ensured. That is why the wind power generators go to local communities, and many of them participate in one bid. And in order to win the bid, they have been spending many, many years there. So now, policy-wise, from a policy perspective, Kato-san, I would like to have your presentation. Thank you very much. I am Kato. I am with Deloitte Tohmatsu. Can I have the next page? I am working at a consulting firm called Deloitte Tohmatsu for about 10 years. Not only offshore wind, but also renewables developer, and local governments and government. We have been providing consultancy service advice in this area. Now, before I joined Deloitte Tohmatsu, renewable energy, and toward the end of my career before Deloitte Tohmatsu, I was also involved in the business of offshore wind itself for some time. Now, offshore wind in Japan, even before the launch of law, I have been involved in offshore, and so I have a close connection in this business. So offshore wind power is not attracting a lot of attention now, and I am very happy and moved because offshore wind has grown this much, because I have been involved in this from the early time. Now, in English, sorry, my page is on English, but actually I have a Japanese version available as well. So perhaps my Japanese version will be available to you through the institute, I guess. So in the case of Japan, we have come through round 3. However, still it is at early stage. So in such a situation, as Obayashi-san mentioned earlier, there are many challenges we are facing. For instance, macroeconomic environment is changing significantly, and also the start of offshore wind business is actually occurring at the same time. So therefore, impact is large. From the bottom left, you can see the interest rate increase and the inflation and the material costs price increasing. And also in Japan, we don't have a supply chain domestically, so we are very vulnerable to changing macroeconomic environment. And as is often reported in newspapers and as we hear from the street people, that this is true. However, there are other factors involved here. And of course, system and policy has been improved. and the government is exploring new improvements as well. So in Japan, the renewable energy itself, the demand for renewables itself has not been fully cultivated for long term. So electricity consumers and also the investor side as well. In the case of offshore wind project, we want to know this is going to be sustainable projects, and there'll be a product pipelines in a sense. So, however, that is not ensured. The government, including AMRE, in the offshore wind business, they would like to expand this business, and this is also advocated in the strategic energy plan as well. However, at what pace, we do not know to what extent these projects will be sustainable. For instance, installation vessels are also one bottleneck as well. And Obayashi-san mentioned earlier, the first round back then, basically, inflation was not considered because Japanese economy was in a deflationary spiral. However, from 2021 or so, we have been seeing the volatile exchange rates, and we are now in inflation mode. Also, wages are rising on the part of companies, and therefore that was about the time we had a round one for offshore wind business. So maybe this is not a very good way of saying, but the economic environment, social environment, and also the bidding system of offshore, they were not well aligned to each other because economic environment was changing significantly, and business plan was not able to altered along in line with the change in economy. And still, Japanese developers lacking expertise and experience. However, when there is such an uncertainty and lack of predictability, they have to put together the plan, and that is why the developers are not able to take risk. However, in the bidding system, we are seeing very large scale of offshore projects than expected. And including round 2 and round 3, the government is considering mitigating measures. Therefore, it isn't that government is doing nothing. So lastly, during the round 1 and round 2 particularly, there are so many companies who wanted to enter into new business, which is offshore. And for instance, in the case of round 2, in certain sea areas, about 10 companies entered and carried out early stage investigation and so forth. Therefore, that led to excessive competition. And of course, that will lead to cost reduction. However, risk money had to be curtailed. So the talent, human resources, and capital, these resources have been scattered among various companies. As a result, we were not able to nurture stronger companies in this industry as a whole. That is to say, talents and resources have been scattered here and there. That's why risk resilience has not been fully cultivated. As I said, in this sense, the government and other stakeholders are responding to this situation and making many efforts. However, the point is, at the time of bidding, we receive information, including central bidding, but we need to develop a very detailed business plan, but there are many uncertain factors. So without such, in spite of such an uncertainty, the companies have to participate in bidding, and therefore bidding time and also final award, there is a huge gap. Therefore, at the early stage, we have to decide the operators, and operators will be able to implement projects. That stance is good. However, in the stage of development, many unexpected things may occur. And in Japan, we don't have many experts or those who have experience, how are we going to cover such a risk? Are we going to use policy or subsidies or financial support? There are many tools available, and I have my own ideas for that. But maybe we should turn to various tools so that we can create an environment in which companies will be able to participate and develop business with a peace of mind. And also another point, when it comes to offshore wind, not only CO2 reduction, but also the industry and also economic security, whether offshore wind is important from that perspective, and that should be further discussed. We don't have turbine manufacturers. We don't have supply chain domestically. In such a situation, offshore wind, is it worth supporting this business in Japan in such a situation? And there are people who have skepticism about the prospect of this offshore business. Therefore, in Japan, we have to say that offshore is important for Japanese industry development and also economic security. And by so doing, we have to create a national support, popular support, in order to make progress. Thank you.
特に
Thank you very much. Especially towards the end, what you have said, if I may ask a question. So the Japanese people are watching, rather than the cost of the wind, the mills on unit by unit basis, but looking at the electricity prices as a whole, how much is paid to the fossil fuels? The burden is too heavy for Japan, but the government is subsidizing, and so it is covered partly, but the others are not really covered. So in that sense, at the infant stage, offshore wind need to be supported. How to position this clearly and to widely disseminate this point, and how can we gain the understanding of others outside of Japan? Yes, I do agree. The fossil fuels, the price is going up right now, and the so-called nuclear energy, it is still declining. So for the Japanese economy, a lot of cash out is happening. The cash is flowing outside Japan. I have heard that semiconductors and automobiles, the wealth that Japan has earned, will be flowing out in terms of cash to the outside because of the fossil fuel import. So fossil fuels may be cheaper right now, but in terms of energy security and the national security of Japan, is it proper for Japan to continue as is? Of course, there are different arguments whether we should go all out for renewables or not, but perhaps we should consider that we are overly dependent upon fossil fuels. So perhaps offshore hot wind, how to nurture it and expand it, should also be argued. In terms of our institute, there are many points that we could rebut. Thank you for your statement. Now, for example, looking at the automotive industry in Japan, the revenues that has been earned, the Trump tariffs are now looming very large. Now, the nuclear energy and fossil fuels, is it really cheap? This is a question that we need to debate more. So in that sense, looking at the United Kingdom and looking at the whole world, Rebecca-san or William-san, from the Danish point of view, whether one stage or two stage for the auction system is being debated. But with the one stage system, it is a centralized system, and it could firmly respond to the needs of the developers, as has been argued. But when you look at successful cases overseas, what are the lessons that could be learned for Japan in order to increase and improve the investor appetite? I will be asking you, the others as well. So Rebecca-san, William-san, and then Kato-san, in that order, please.
Yes, lots of really good points raised, and we just on the last points raised by Kato-san at the revision conference 2 days ago. We had a lot of content around the dependence of Japan on imported fossil fuels and the associated costs, and those cost comparisons. And I know that REI has done a lot of work on that and will continue to do work on that. So I urge you to go and take a look at that online. But to the question that you asked, Mika-san, in terms of what are investors looking for, essentially, right? I think Jens has already talked at length about what RWE considers to be particularly important. But if I can just pick out and maybe summarize some of the points. For international investors, I think it is about that long-term clarity. So clarity of offtake, clarity that your project is going to be able to get to that generation phase, and also the government having a plan which it really shares with industry to make the most of the resources that it has available. So whether we're talking about 1 stage or 2 stage, whether we're talking about offtake or how grid and ports also come into that question, I think it is about having that clear plan so that investors can really see the route through for their investment in the way that Jens has very well articulated already. So when it comes to the international examples, I think nowhere is perfect. Some countries have done it better than others at different times, and it is a continuous learning journey. But I think the experience of the UK that I set out earlier, the experience of Denmark, which William also set out, both of those case studies provide really good examples of trial and error that other countries have been going through just recently on how to tackle some of these challenges of the inflationary environment, challenges also when it comes to the grid issue and ports infrastructure, etc. So that would be my main comment, Mika-san. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much.
I don't have any good suggestions for Japan. I have a lot of respect for the complexity that this country faces, and I have a lot of respect for the dilemmas that you're facing with your energy strategy. But a couple of things that we've done in Denmark that has worked for us. One is a principle that we have worked under in terms of designing risk allocation in these offshore projects has been the one that is most capable of taking a risk should be the one also taking on that risk. So that's a core philosophy. So and under that philosophy, you can really branch out and really try to understand and analyze who's actually in the best place to do certain things. And Jens had an example about, okay, is RWE really in the best company to build the line from the shore to the substation? Question mark. That's number one. Number two is when we look, one aspect that we have maybe not touched upon so much here is sort of like all the hidden costs. We've spoken a lot about the capex and the project costs and DevEx and so on and so forth. But there are a lot of hidden costs that we also need to consider. And that's also something that we as regulators have considered in our design and approach. One is the energy system approach to looking at costs. What does it cost to have renewables in your system? What are the trade-offs of having renewables in your systems? That's number one. Number two is the cost of regulation. What does it cost to have a one-step approach versus a two-step approach? Then there is the socioeconomic approach, right? As I explained with the capability-based CFD, we've taken a socioeconomic approach, figured out that the capability-based CFD is the best overall for renewable energy. So I think I don't have a recommendation for Japan because we have to be true and respectful for the dynamics and the dilemmas and the challenges that you're facing. But there's a lot of inspiration out there that you can find, that you can use, some of the principles you can apply to analyze the situation and see what serves the Japanese people the best. I think we've had, it's great with these interactions here that REI are putting in place because this is a great platform for us to exactly do that, to have these exchanges. And I think we should definitely continue to do that. We have a very close dialogue with METI. I'm sure that they have maybe found some inspiration in what we've done in Denmark, and we hope to continue that good dialogue. But it's also very encouraging to hear Jens saying that he has seen a very positive change in development in Meti's approach. So in that sense, things are definitely moving in the right direction in Japan.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. Eiga Insights, the presentation has been made earlier. It was mentioned that the preconditions needs also to be changed, not just redesigning of the auction system. So how to procure the vessels, for example, and for construction of the ports and harbors. To what extent the Japanese companies are bearing the cost burden. This needs to be changed as well. So Kato-san, any comments? Thank you. Earlier, from RWE, it was mentioned that capital cost is rising significantly. I agree with that view. So it may be repetitious, but starting from the bidding up until financial closing, risk money will accumulate, including the drilling cost, as well as at ports. The developers must spend a lot of cost and to try to make it easier to move forward. And at the early time, the operation must start. That is the rule right now. So at the early stage, you need to have the money ready in order to place the order. So you will be utilizing your equity, and the proportion is getting higher and higher. So not just cash out increases, the very expensive capital cost must be invested at the early stage. So you need to go for IRR to be larger. If not, the return on investment will not be there. So the IRR, internal rate of return, needs to be very firm. If not, you cannot really explain your business case. Meaning that the electricity sales price will go up. So not the visible factors would loom large. The cost will be increasing for factors other than cost cash out. So the risk money, which must be spent largely at the early stage, how can we contain that? That would mean lesser burden on the Japanese citizens as well. So at the infant stage that we are in Japan, what kind of support could be given by the government? Of course, support will be necessary at the different levels.
RWE が、
Thank you very much. RWE gained 6.7 gigawatt in AR7. That is a huge. But on the other hand, as Danish government new system was introduced, 6 giga down to 2 giga. So the volume-wise, it came down. So the scale is important. However, if it is too large, for instance, it takes over 15 years, for instance, how about the burden on that in such a large case?
Let me be honest, I think had we had a different auction regime in the UK, it wouldn't have taken 15 years. Vattenfall probably would have built those projects. I no longer work for government, and I'm a proud taxpayer in Japan, so I can maybe allow myself to give an advice. Let's reap the benefit of what other markets have done before us, right? Let's remove as many obstacles and red tape as we possibly can. Let's look at what are the drivers that are hindering offshore wind deployment, and then look at the ones that are hard to abate and down, and then start with each and every one of them. And that's going to require sacrifice. So the shipping industry in Japan will not like that we look into the cabotage laws, but what's in the ultimate interest of the Japanese people? That's the question we need to answer ourselves. And I'm a positive person. As I said before, Fukuoka-san of METI mentioned yesterday that it's part of the core pillar of the Japanese government's growth plan. Now, if we can get a little bit like what we've seen in Denmark, and I think that's maybe where William is selling himself a little bit short. I think one of the biggest testaments for why offshore wind works in Denmark, because we're a small country. I'm a Danish national myself, so I can also lean a little bit here. We don't have, like Japan, world-class manufacturing in many things, maybe except for offshore wind and really good stereos. And Lego, true. Maybe we have more than but nonetheless, we're less than 6 million people. We're a knowledge-based society. Our tax pressure is one of the highest in the world. Yet we've managed to secure, and William can probably share more accurate numbers, but more than 60% of renewables into our grids, right? Over a period of time. And how did we do that? Because there was consensus among the government, because there was a nationalized policy that we want this to be a success. And I think this is a fantastic place to start, to make sure that not only the Wind Power Policy Office in METI, which is working so hard every day, every night. I'm always impressed. You know, on a Friday evening at 8 o'clock, people are working hard in METI to find solutions, and we have to commend that. But it's one branch of government doing that. If we can get all branches of government working just as hard for us to achieve energy independence, cleaner, greener air to the Japanese people, I think that's a really good place to start.
Rebecca,
Rebecca, I would like to ask your comment. To leave everything to METI, whether that is good or not. Of course, this is the one thing we need to discuss. And of course, within METI itself, there are many different views and arguments. But the wind power-related team is working very hard. I think it is very important. So, Rebecca, do you have any comment to add?
Excellent comments have been made so far, but many of these challenges, I think, could also be addressed through proper industrial planning. And we're at a point now with the energy security imperative where I think energy security gives us that framework by which we really have an opportunity to set out what the future direction is for Japan. And so I encourage everyone involved here in the room, and we had some good discussions with METI over the last few days on this, to really seize the opportunity to put in place a framework which looks at these things holistically and really sets out the supply chain story, the port story, and the grid story to really push forward for offshore wind, because I think it's absolutely the right time to do that to increase Japan's resilience.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much, William. I asked a question to Jan earlier, but the Danish government has come down with a smaller scale in order to avoid the supply chain bottlenecks and also to avoid a tight energy market, power market. What kind of debates took place before the government decided this new auction policy?
That was basically feedback from the market. I think that's the simple answer. That is the industry saying that if you want 6 gigawatt by 2030, then that's not going to happen, because every other country in Europe wants the same. So you need to spread this out a little bit, and that's what we did. So I mean, we have a very strong culture in Denmark of having a close dialogue between government and industry, and that goes far back. And as Jens mentioned before, several decades of very close collaboration, close dialogue. I mean, we have built-in market dialogues in our tendering process. So we solicit the feedback, get the inputs, tweak and twist to make it palatable for the industry. And so it is this agile and flexible and dynamic approach that makes us adaptable, I think. And as Jens said, we're a small country, can't afford a lot. So that's important to us. And if you look at the volume, it has to be a volume that you can manage as a government, right? And it has to be a volume that you can manage as an industry. So somehow you need to find these two lines need to cross. Yeah.
Now, at our institute,
Tanaka-san, who has been the MC today, has been mentioning she is well versed on Danish system, and she is writing many columns, the mechanism of auctioning in Denmark. And in the stage before that, what kind of dialogue has been seen? The Institute has been putting those processes also in the report. So if you could please access to such reports.
It was just about the previous point. I don't want to stop you from highlighting Tanaka-san's excellent work as well, which I know is extremely good. I think it was just about this point regarding Denmark and how Denmark has really listened to that feedback. I mean, just to really emphasize that the system that Denmark had outlined before was radically different to the changes they've now made to reform that system as a result of industry feedback. I mean, it was extremely different what they'd outlined before. So I commend William and the whole Danish team for having really listened and made those changes. Let's see what happens in the auction outcomes. Everyone's eagerly awaiting that, I know. But just to emphasize that, there is this opportunity to change, and having had challenges and failures, also Japan absolutely is not unique in that. So it's about, I think, this close industry dialogue to solve those problems as we've just seen. And I can only just emphasize that is a really strong industry government collaboration, same in the UK. And I think many of the ways that policy has been reformed is attributable to that kind of close dialogue. So as Jens was saying, I think it's really excellent that METI is certainly in this spirit of collaboration. I know that REI will do some good work on that. JWPA, who I think somewhere in the audience, and we at GWEC are also trying to help where we can to push forward this dialogue as well.
Thank you very much, Kato-san. From that perspective, in Japan, businesses and government and the process of making a policy, how do you view this process in Japan? Policy-making process. Thank you very much. The dialogue, communication is very important. People are emphasizing this. Yes, I totally agree with that. Because for the past 3 or 4 years, many things have happened, and the government and companies as well were not perhaps able to assume those things that happened for the past few years. And from my perspective as well, even before that, I have been involved in this business, this industry, and I couldn't imagine these things would happen for the past few years. Therefore, in such a situation, government sincerely has to listen to voices of companies and also company side as well. The government, from the various perspectives, is making a rule. So in that sense, what kind of policy process is available, and for companies, what is happening to companies, and they have to share the information and knowledge between government and companies. So I think there is a asymmetry of information so far. That is what I think.
Thank you very much. 2 points. There is an interesting thing that I would like to ask. Going back to the previous discussion, to scale up, that is necessary, but it needs to be continued. So which would be the necessary condition is the point of question. From the industry perspective, 2 to 3 gigawatts to be introduced per year. If not, we won't be able to create the critical mass of supply chain in this country. And continuity is also something necessary. 10 years and 15 years, you cannot really apply your capability to the market. So continuity and one-time big scale project. So both may be needed, but your response. And Jens is raising his hand, perhaps. So Mr. Kato first. Yes, as you say, you need a certain the scale. The windmills may not be viable if it is too small a project. So if you go for stability, but even though on one-shot basis you have big project, you also need continuity, that the world needs to know that you do have a market here. That means continuity. The suppliers will not commit to your market unless they can see that. And for the Japanese companies to make investment and make returns out of the investment, how can you be able to find and build the projects on a continuous basis, because it takes a long time to make your return. So continuity matters as well. Of course, small scale will not do, but the bigger scale as well as continuity, both needs to be ensured.
Everything Katsusana said, I agree vividly with. Right? We did not come to Japan to build one project and leave. We're a build-to-operate outfit. So when we make a financial commitment, we do that to operate the assets, to decommission the asset 30, 40 years later, right? It's a 40, 50-year commitment, just one project. And we don't want to be an accepted member of the community. We want to be a trusted member of that community. And that takes time, and it takes trust. And to address that point, I think we really like that Meiji is now considering also making their own economic feasibility checks for sites before they're auctioned out. It feels very much that the promotion of sites so far has mainly been driven based on whether you had local community acceptance or not. And we think we will profit as an industry to look at that more holistically. And that comes back to the point I made initially to say we need to think across prefecture and municipality lines on a map. That's something that we people invented. It's not something that really exists. And we need to think about the bigger benefits. So if you have two sites that are currently planned to be auctioned out separately that are in the vicinity of each other, it makes perfect sense to say, could that be combined into one site? So that all of a sudden you have a site that's scalable and easily comparable with other markets. Because even though Denmark's sized down from 6 to 2 gigawatts, we're still talking sizable sites. William mentioned the Tor project. It's a project that we're very proud to be building, and we aim to take COD on that project by early 27, as far as I recall. And that's 1 gigawatt. It's a site that's going to be providing energy for more than 1 million people in Denmark, right? And that's the scale we need to look at. So these 300 megawatt sites, they would be going nowhere. So we need to look at what can we consolidate? What can we bring together? How can we ensure that falls like pearls on a string, so that developers and the market, the supply chain that will need to make the necessary investments to build factories here feel there's a sizable market for us to have the appetite to actually invest in. And when we do that, it's a positive cycle, because that's what is required to bring down the cost of these assets.
すみません、一個だけちょっと確認させていただきます。
One point of clarification. So to integrate to one sea area to a certain scale, 1 giga or 2 giga, 3 giga, that was what you were mentioning.
Where it makes sense, right? I think those of us that are well vested with the sites that are, let's say, prospective, potentially coming in the funnel, we do definitely see that there are side opportunities out there that if you merge them, you could definitely reap some of those large-scale benefits. It feels like, to be honest, that we often go in the different direction. I'll give you an example. So up in Hokkaido, for instance, you have the Hiyama project. Because of local opposition, that site went from one side of 1.2 gigawatts to all of a sudden being split in two. Then you need dual transmission lines. Then you need dual O&M setup. You just increase the capex of those two projects immensely, rather than looking at from an individual project point of view. So I think there are many dialogues that we can have. Whether it's 2 gigawatts, 3 gigawatts, I think we'll have to see. We also want to make sure that the market can pace at a level where we can keep up. But we definitely want to see anywhere from 1 to 3 gigawatts being deployed on an annual basis, so that there's a continuous funnel. Because also, I'm not naive. I know I won't win in every single auction. So there has to be a trajectory that makes sense for the industry and not just for one company.
ただ一方でそのサイトの
But on the other hand, the way of thinking when it comes to site selection, and you talked about Hiyama, and if it is split into two areas, then I just want to confirm with you, in the case of Hiyama, there is 1 gigawatt in Hiyama. That is more desirable? Or because there are two slightly apart from each other, so transmission line would be a difficulty. So if they are close to each other, they can be combined. What the government is doing now, I think the government is moving in that direction, as you described. Every year, more than 1 gigawatt auctioning will be made available in various parts of Japan consecutively. That's what the government is doing now.
If it's 1 gigawatt scattered over 4 sites, then it's not scalable. We can't negotiate large-scale agreements with the OEMs. We can't obtain scalable benefits from various different projects. And that's why we say the size of each individual project matters and the size of each individual auction matters. And that's something that we hope to enter into a continuous dialogue with the government about, because at the end of the day, and this is the prime discussion between METI and ANRE at the moment, it's the cost of electricity. It's the burden on us, the taxpayers here in this room. And if we set up obstacles to make each and every site more expensive, we are increasing that burden rather than decreasing it.
いやただいろいろな事業者の
Yes, but when I listen to the voices of different developers, for example, the usage of ports and harbors will be too concentrated, or the vessels are too much of a concentration, and the supply chain will become too tight. There are those voices as well. So one developer should do the whole scale.
We can have a long discussion on this particular point. What's in our interest is to build meaningful projects that make sense from a bankability point of view, and that is to the benefit of the Japanese people. That's why we're here. That's why we continue to be here.
It would be fantastic to have Vestas here to have this conversation, but since they're one of our members, our clients, maybe I can reflect what I think that they would say if they were here at this time, which is that scale is absolutely important to be able to have that clarity of that return on investment. If you're going to build a factory, you need to make sure that the factory won't just be full first year and then a big gap until the third year and then another big gap. And because OEMs are the kind of top tier suppliers, that has a trickle down effect on the whole supply chain. So this is not just about, one developer point of view. It's about a whole system, a supply chain point of view, and the impact on cost and competitiveness, as Jens is saying.
今の議論、ウィリアムさん、加藤さん少し。
Now, William and Kato-san, do you have any comments to add to the discussion that you have just heard? RWE is a big company, it's a global company. Then how about the Japanese companies? In general, of course, the bigger the size, the better, because there will be the merit of scale. And also for infrastructure, there will be all sorts of costs incurred, but the scale matters, I do understand. And Japanese businesses, just one company alone, to take the initiative to make that amount of investment into the infrastructure, they are not ready at all right now. So for the Japanese businesses, compact size may be better. So the policy decision of the government of Japan right now is in that direction.
ですけど、
But compact, can it be 30 megawatt or the 500 megawatt? In order to be a commercial scale, at least 300 and 500 mega. So smaller than that, it is not attractive at all. And also, Rebecca said, from suppliers' perspective, the Vestas will be coming to Japan or not, and that is a lot talked about in many newspapers. So I wish we had a Vestas participant in this session. We would be able to have an even more active discussion. Now, turbine manufacturers' voices I hear, and 2 to 3 gigawatt every year. We need that scale every year. And also, not only in Japan, if the company has a basis in Japan, they can consider possibility in Taiwan and South Korea. So such a regional perspective is possible. RWE is a big company as a developer, and they are engaged in various regions. Therefore, I think regional efficiency can go a long way. And also, Kato-san and Ian-san said earlier, it is true that the METI is working hard, particularly Wind Business Bureau is listening to the voices of industry, and they are trying to learn lessons from overseas experience. That said, there is a asymmetry of information between the government and the business. That's not the case, I don't think, because there is silos within the ministry, and the grid issue and also transmission load issue, and these are discussed in separate divisions and bureaus. Round 2 and round 3 of auction, in order to ensure bankability, long-term decarbonization auction has been discussed for a long time. And actually, it is not under the purview of offshore wind power bureau. Therefore, variable renewable energy have to be introduced more. For that, flexibility is important. Ian-san said earlier, electrification is important, and I agree. So electrification can be done by a lot of renewable energy, particularly in 40 to 50 years to come. In order to design the society, we need a transmission line, and also we have to have a power market in order to support that direction. And Denmark is conducting a very advanced and innovative efforts in this regard. I think that is important. In that sense, what we heard today, toward 2040, the offshore wind, in order to have a large offshore with lower cost at that time, cost has to come down. And when you consider that, a single time the tendering reform, rather the continuous pipeline of projects, and also predictability of infrastructure development is also important. I think we are running out of time, so I want to give you 1 minute each to conclude. Going forward, within 2 to 3 years, Japan's offshore wind, do you think it can take off? And for that, what would be the most important factor for that to happen? What do we have to do now? Why do I say 2 to 3 years? Because by 2030, we would like to have a certain gigawatt, more than 2 gigawatt, more than 1.9 gigawatt. So in order to have that, what do we have to do now? And after that, we want to have more gigawatt. And in order to have that flow coming up, what do we have to do now? And in order to achieve those goals in those years, I think we have to focus on coming 2 to 3 years. Ians, Williams, and Kato-san, Rebecca, in that order, please.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. The short answer is yes. I absolutely think we can. METI is working die-hard on making sure that the solutions are found for the round 2 and round 3 projects. I think that is the way forward to make sure that those projects are actually delivered, that we don't experience another auction failure. And I think that the way forward with the long-term decarbonization auction for those projects is an excellent idea. I really like Kato-san's idea about utilizing maybe the GX Act more. Also because there are, let's say, trillions tucked into the GX Act that were hydrogen allocated that maybe could be used for offshore. And at the same time, I would recommend not just METI, but all branches of government to go see William and get some advice on what it takes to build an offshore wind market in Japan. Thank you very much.
And thank you for that support, Jens, at that commercial. I really appreciate that. So my number will be on the screen shortly. Governments represent what a country wants. the industry represent what the country can. So if the government can make the industry or can make it attractive for the industry to operate and stay, then the government can likely achieve what it wants.
少し考えておりました。
I was still thinking what to say. Now, this is highly personal. Now, I think people matters very much. Now we see headwind for the offshore wind power, and there are many businesses who are about to take negative decisions on offshore wind. This is what I hear often. Then for offshore wind, those people who are committed themselves, there's still many people here in Japan as well. So you need to think about your own career forward more seriously. So those who are committed to offshore the wind and you would like to work in the longer term, there are several Japanese companies who are trying to do that. And you need to make them profitable so that they can continue to make investments. You need to create such business environment here in Japan. Unless we see that, you cannot really train people, and the people will move out of this industry to other industries. So in the medium to longer term, for the offshore wind to spread and expand, you wouldn't be able to have enough people and talents. Even though infrastructure may be there, in the future, there will be no more people to support the infrastructure. That is the biggest concern I have right now. So I hope that we can avoid that. So in the coming 2 to 3 years, it will be crucial.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much, REI. We like to hire people who understand business and who can write policies.
Liked the people power message of Kato-san, and indeed I was saying something earlier today. It's the people in this room who are going to push forward the industry, I'm sure, and who can make a huge contribution. So please keep going and connect with each other. I think that's really important. But in answer to your question, Mika-san, yes, you can, and yes, you must. I think the energy security imperative and the times that we're living in demand it. And actually, just this morning, GWEC launched a paper aimed at different governments, which sets out a 5-point plan to enhance countries' energy security and the actions that different governments can take right now. And one of those key recommendations is around cross-departmental committees to really drive forward renewables at the heart of the energy and security imperative. So I don't have a QR code, sorry, but seems that Jens has volunteered to take messages from everyone in the audience. So I'll send him the link to the document and he can send it to you. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。自然エネルギー財団のウェブ
Thank you very much. In the Institute's website, we will be able to upload. So please take a look at the material. With this, we would like to end the panel discussion. There are many things that we would like to argue with Jens, especially 2 hours longer. I would like to discuss with you. But big applause for everyone, please.